Shalom and welcome to another podcast here at the Alma Center in the Western Galilee of Northern Israel. With me today are two of our senior researchers at the center, Ibrahim and Ahmad, welcome, and also Daniel Salami. Thank you so much both for coming. Today we're going to be dealing with the current situation in Lebanon, and of course the first question is, what's happening today? Give us an update on the way things are playing out in Lebanon. So on October 17th, we saw the beginning of the WhatsApp protests, or the Intifadat al-WhatsApp in Arabic. We've been reporting for a while about the staggering economic situation in Lebanon, and the economy is continually sinking. And I think in a very frantic and desperate measure, you can call it this way, the Lebanese government tried to impose a tax on WhatsApp calls. I think about 20 cents a day on Levi WhatsApp calls, as well as taxes on tobacco and gasoline. And in response, that was kind of a triggering event. I mean, the situation had been going on for a while, but I think it was a triggering event that got people into the streets and started massive protests that have been going on till today. And of course, the high unemployment rate, over 25%, and the situation is very unclear, and we don't know what is gonna be the answer at the end of it.
Okay, thank you. Daniel, from your perspective, how do you see what's happening in Lebanon today?
We see a very interesting thing happening these days that was triggered by the WhatsApp protest, as Ibrahim observed. The thing we need to understand here is it's not only the unemployment rate and the WhatsApp tax. The economy in Lebanon has been staggering for 2 or 3 decades now, and people are finding it very difficult to get a job, and even if they do get a job, their salary is significantly lower than the average in their profession. So
these new taxes were just triggers, in fact.
Exactly. So this is why the Prime Minister Saad al-Khalil addressed the people the third or fourth day of the protest, and he tried to engage in some sort of reforms to gives them something to hang on. He said that he's going to cut the parliament members' salary by 50%, is going to cancel ministries and councils that are no longer necessary. And of course, they canceled the WhatsApp tax, and a planned increase in the electricity tariffs.
Thank you, Daniel, for that. Now, just to get a little more deeper, can you tell us a little more about the nature of these protests? How different are they from other protests that are happening not only in Lebanon, but in the Arab world?
I think that the most important thing in this protest that the people are using it actually in their benefit is that it's covering all the sectors inside of Lebanon. It's not only the Jews or the Shiites or the Sunnis or the Christians. It's all in all. And this is why Nasrallah, in his last speech last Friday, he said that the aim of this protest, the anger of the people, is justified, and it's aimed towards everyone, not me, not Hariri, not the president. It's all, everyone. And the protesters, by the way, took that to their benefit, and they answered him in Arabic, كُلٌّ يعني كُلٌّ Nasrallah واحد منهم, which means everyone is everyone. Nasrallah is one of them, one of everyone.
He's included.
Yeah, it runs better on Arabic, but yeah.
It sounds a lot better.
Yeah, they made it kind of a catchy phrase song. So if you dig a little deeper, you see a civil uprising protest, very peaceful, by the way. There are no casualties, no any significant security matters, but I think that it's if you compare it to the wider Arab Spring uprising, I would say it's a lot more calmer, but they are calling for the entire government and maybe even regime change. They don't want the same government.
They don't want more of the same.
They don't want more of the same.
Okay, thank you. Ibrahim, what's your take on this?
I definitely agree with Daniel, what Daniel said about the fact that it's definitely a cross-religious sect. Everybody's kind of uniting under the Lebanese flag. We haven't seen any other political affiliations within the protests. There was no targeting one political party or taking a political agenda or such. It was just the voice of the Lebanese people as a people, and I think that's very
important to emphasize and honestly to be admired, because the protests, like Daniel said, for the most part have been very peaceful. A lot of music, a lot of dancing around and parties, and they're making look like kind of a good vibe to the protests instead of making it like a violence and something that is radical and not to be supported. It's quite the contrary. When you see it in such a positive way, people tend to even go more so and support these kind of protests. But I think also the main highlight is the fact that it's highly dominated by the youth. The youth are taking the most of the mass of these protests. They're on the streets. They're the one who's publishing on Twitter, on Facebook, or in general on social media. They're the ones who are basically on the front lines. And we saw in the last only couple of days when the protesters started blocking streets, when the strikes started to become even harsher, it was the youth who were in the front. And I think that's massive. We definitely saw that as well in the Arab Spring. But specifically because Lebanon is such a sectarian government and it relies heavily on the differences between the different sects, and there's always that feeling that, you know, if anything happens, we can always get to a civil war because of all these clashes between the different sectors. I think it's great to see that on that kind of a protest, everybody united under one statement.
Okay, so Daniel, tell me, are Hezbollah at all part of these protests? How are they invested in this uprising?
Hezbollah has a very silent and maybe hidden role, but he's a very significant cause of the protest and the situation in Lebanon now. If you look at it, Hezbollah is a corrupt organization. It's a terror organization and it's corrupt. It's not only taking all the resources and money out of its country, it's even corrupt within itself. So naturally, people has many criticism towards the organization, but there are people that are doing efforts to censor that criticism. We've seen on live TV people that approach the reporter to say some things against Hezbollah and against Nasrallah, but they were told to remain silent or to be quiet, or some mysterious person would get along and whisper them, and they would surprisingly and I don't know, for unknown reason they would change their mind. Right. Now, why is that happening? What's behind that? What's deeper is that they believe that Hezbollah is trying to control a very significant part of the state, of the economy and its resources in a way that it's affecting the entire country.
Thank you, Daniel. Ibrahim, can you tell us, please, how do you think that this situation in Lebanon today, how similar or different is it from the Arab Spring?
Look, there's definitely similarities and differences with the Arab Spring, with 2011. I think the biggest similarity, you can put it this way, is the fact first we had a triggering event. It was the one thing that got people on the streets. In Tunisia, for instance, it was the person who set himself on fire in front of the government official office. In Egypt, it was cutting off the internet for a while. And you only need that triggering event. And in Lebanon, we saw it. We saw it with the WhatsApp tax. The other thing is that it's dominated by the youth. I think the Arab Spring definitely was dominated by the youth movement and them standing in the streets, and that kind of brought everybody else along, and we definitely see that in Lebanon as well. I think the difference is, or at least I hope that it is the fact that, first of all, like we said, we have all sects in these protests. In Egypt, it wasn't as clear. It was definitely an Egyptian movement, but you always had like segregation from, for instance, the Muslim Brotherhood, or when the women went into the street, the more religious groups were not in as much. It wasn't as inclusive as we see it here. The Christian community had been targeted before the revolution in Egypt and even after the revolution, and they targeted churches and bombing churches as well. We don't see that kind of like a sectarian issue, which is good to see, even though Lebanon is hugely divided in that essence. But I think the main difference other than that is the inclusion of women as well. In Egypt, we saw inclusion in women. The only problem in Egypt was that it's completely stopped once the discussion was about the new government. What are we going to do next? I remember on Women's International Day in 2011, the women went to the streets in Egypt and wanted to basically voice out their state that they want to be part of the newly government, or it wasn't even a government. Like, how are we going to approach a new government? They went to the streets and they were stopped by the men who stood by them in the protests. It's not even the Muslim Brotherhood, it's not the radicals, it's the people who stood by their side. I'm not sure if that's going to be the same with Lebanon. The inclusion of women in Lebanon is different. It's a much more liberal state in general. And we see the women there on the front rows. And I think that definitely is different to what we saw elsewhere. But the most worrying thing, and I think it's basically very similar to Egypt, was the fact that once people went to the street, they had a target. They wanted to take down the government. But there was no account to what are we doing next. You know, I was in Egypt in 2011 and you asked the people, okay, so Mubarak is out, what are you doing next? They don't know. They're talking only about the fact that they're so great and they took down Mubarak. But what is the next plan? And I think here is also unclear. I'm not sure how these protests, as great as they look, will pan out at the end.
Thank you, Ibrahim. On to the next question. Could you tell us, is there a proposed solution by the protesters? Do they have a plan for what's going to happen after the resignation of the parliamentarians? What is your prediction of where this is heading?
So, like I said, there isn't a clear position that the protesters are going forward to. The only problem is that there are multiple proposals. One of them is re-elections. Unfortunately, with that kind of a solution, I mean, the political parties are the same, the political agendas are the same. So even in re-election, what are we going to get that is different from what we have right now? Mm-hmm. I'm really doubtful on that kind of a solution. The other one, and we heard it in some of the videos that were published in the streets, was basically the call out for a military control. On that level, I'm not really sure how will that fold out, because Lebanon has two armies, not one. Hezbollah has its own military, and I'm not sure if it will be very keen on the Lebanese army to take over the country unless it's by its support. I mean, the Lebanese army has a large number of Shiites in it. We can never know how much they can influence the military from within. And if we do see a military coup, I definitely see it with you can call it with the blessing of Hezbollah. Because the other solution will be a clash between the two. And that's the third possibility, is that it will turn into a civil war. And in that kind of a case, Lebanon has known civil wars. They can be very bloody. The two biggest figureheads in that kind of a clash will be the government, would be the Lebanese army and Hezbollah. Mm-hmm. The ones who are going to be standing strongly will be probably the Sunnis, parts of the Christians, I don't know, we can ask Daniel about the Druze minority as well, because it's a minority there as well. It's not an easy thing to go against Hezbollah in any case. Right. And the last solution will be it will die out. I mean, the government can always soak in all these protests until the people
run out of steam,
and then back to normal.
Okay. Thank you, Ibrahim. Daniel, what's your intake in this? What do you think? How do you think this is going to pan out in the end? Do you think this can lead to a civil war, or are there other solutions that you can think of that would be more applicable?
Lebanon has a very bloody history, just like Ibrahim said, with the civil wars. So I think that they will not go to civil war. Also, we need to know that even if they went to re-election, it's going to be a very hard job for them to establish a new government, just like it took them almost a year to establish, 8 months to establish the government after the previous elections. So no one wants to go to election, no one wants to go to revolution. I think that at some point it will die out. Since the protesters say and claim that it's a spontaneous thing that's happening in Lebanon now, they have no leadership, they have no someone to guide them. So some of them are talking about shuffling the entire governmental system in Lebanon. Now it's based on sectorial parliament. Each region has their own people with reserved seats in the parliament, and they want to change all that. They don't care anymore what your religion and what your sect is. They just want someone to govern truly and to get them out of this mess that they're in.
They want technocrats, to have people who are effective in the particular ministry they run with no other...
Yeah, there have been some talks about technocrats. Nasrallah, interestingly enough, said that he opposes this. Some say that he's actually scared or stressed of being a technocrat. But I think that they won't go to a re-election. I think that they're going to do some reforms in the government. And actually today, the Lebanese President, Michel Aoun, is going to give a very significant speech, and we'll listen to what he's going to say.
It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting.
But don't you think that, reshuffling the government in terms of the, like you said, it's split into sects within the government, but if we change that kind of format, doesn't it need to reshuffle the whole system? I mean, they did it so they avoid civil war, essentially, right from the beginning.
Yeah.
How do you think it will pan out? I'm just curious.
It's hard to predict how it's going to pan out. But I think that if they went to reshuffle, it's not going to a place of clashes and violence. For example, if we compare this protest not to the Arab Spring, but to the Yellow Vest that happened in France, they both share a very interesting common thing. They are both economical protests. Mm-hmm. So if you try to recall and remember what images you remember from the protests that took place recently in France, speaking for myself, I would remember gas masks, I would remember tear gas, police officers, clashes between security and protesters. And what do you take from this protest in Lebanon? Very smiling people singing Baby Shark to crying babies, and DJs having a massive street party till dawn. So I think that they're doing very huge efforts to take it to a peaceful, quiet protest, and this is why I don't believe that if they reshuffle the government, I don't think it's going to a violent direction. I want to believe, at least.
Thank you, Daniel, and it's an opportunity also to thank you and Ibrahim for giving us some insight into the ongoing protests in Lebanon, something I'm sure that we will be continuing to monitor over the coming months. Thank you also for participating in this podcast. We look forward to welcoming you in future podcasts very, very soon.